Good morning, everyone. Wherever you are in Malaysia or anywhere in the world, welcome to the latest webinar in Badan Warisan Malaysia's talk series. I'm the moderator for today. My name is Anand Krishnan, and I'm a professional architect in private practice. As council member of Badan Warisan Malaysia, I have the privilege today to introduce you to architect Bane, who is today's speaker on the traditional Malay house. The traditional Malay house in Malaysia is an icon of vernacular architecture. It is raised off the ground on stilts and is made of timber. The roof can be in various forms. If you haven't already seen one, it still exists in the small towns and kampongs of Malaysia. It's going to be a fascinating talk about a much loved work of architecture and important part of our nation's cultural and built heritage. Let me introduce you to the speaker. Architect Bane appreciates fine heritage architecture. His keen interest in built heritage conservation stems from the time when he was studying architecture in Canterbury, Kent, and when he trained and worked as a professional architect in the United Kingdom in the late 70s and 80s. He hails from Kuala Lumpur and was schooled at St. John's Institution. He's a fellow of the Pertubuhan Architect Malaysia, a member of the Royal Institute of British Architects, a founding council member of the Malaysian Institute of Interior Designers, and a council member of Badan Warisan Malaysia. He was a member of the faculty of the Built Environment, Department of Architecture, University of Malaya. Before we begin, please note that the talk will go on for about 40 minutes or so. After that, we'll have a Q&A session. If you have any questions, please forward them to me using the chat mode. Please state your name and where you're from. I will moderate these questions and I will ask these questions on your behalf. If you have connection issues, please just reload. So without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to Architect Bane to begin his presentation. How are you, Bane?
Good morning, Anand.
Good.
I'm well.
Already?
Quite excited.
Lots of slides?
Quite a lot of slides. I have to rush through them, I'm afraid.
All right, the screen is yours. Your 40 minutes begin now.
Thank you. Thank you, Anand, for your kind introduction. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for spending the time this morning to share, for me to share my thoughts on the traditional Malay house. Now, this is a very big subject, and I've chosen just to do a little introduction to the vernacular architecture of Peninsular Malaysia. Let me just get this going. Okay, right. So I've outlined the talk as follows. I'll start off by painting the Malaysian background to the architecture, followed by the very unique architecture, which is of this Malay house, the design of it, the layout, and how it had adapted to the local tropical climate, and then of course leading into the regional variations in the original form. Then I'll talk on the cultural context, how the Malay way of life actually spawned this beautiful piece of architecture, a simple abode to live in. Now, I'll then move into how the Malay house is built traditionally, then followed with modern adaptations to this early vernacular, and then closing off with the future, the relevance of this beautiful piece of architecture, how it can survive against the changes, the threats, and also looking at opportunities, how we can not lose this valuable lessons which have been learned in the past by our ancestors. Okay, traditional Malay dwellings are still found. They are either nestled in a sort of rural landscape setting of a paddy field, or in a riverine village or kampong, or at an estuary, or maybe alongside a sandy beach amidst a clump of shady coconut trees. These houses blend beautifully into the landscape. They are of local materials and so on. So this picture below shows a beautiful old house which was relocated in Langkawi by the beach. And this second illustration shows a house in Perak, there's a regional variety. You'll notice that the steps are a bit higher, the flight of stairs. These buildings are all timber, essentially timber buildings built on stilts, and they're elevated above the ground with an undercroft. So you can see the bucolic setting of golden palms and a very green setting. This one is an example in Terengganu, where the influence from the north, from the Patani and Siamese features, much taller. The buildings are elevated higher than the rest of the peninsula. We will just take it in as we go along. And here's an example where shown where the house is actually located in an urban landscape setting. Once, like in the case of Kuala Lumpur, there was a series of suburban villages, like say Kampung Pandan, Kampung Segambut, Kampung Datuk Keramat, Kampung Baru, etc., which surrounded the birthplace of Kuala Lumpur, where the two rivers met, the confluence of the two rivers, and there the old mining town of Kuala Lumpur started. But these are peripheral suburban villages, which has now been absorbed into the modern metropolis of Kuala Lumpur. Right? Here is an example of one of these kampungs. In this case, this is Kampung Baru. You can see the skyscrapers in the backdrop. The old bucolic setting has somewhat disappeared. And here are two more examples, different sizes, very modest houses, as you can see. And you can also see that some of the houses actually feature more modern materials. So let me just talk now quickly about the architecture. It is basically a timber frame structure of hardwood timbers built on stilts, which has evolved to adapt to the local tropical climate. Now, to keep the building structure undamaged from the dampness or floods, houses are elevated off the ground, and by using timber posts, which sit on concrete pads. Now, because the building is very light relatively, it just sits on concrete pads. There are no foundations, so to speak. Now, in the hot and humid climate, this raised position helps ventilation for human comfort, allowing for cold airflow underneath it. Now, the space underneath is also used for storage or breeding livestock. Most of the time, the ceiling is not high enough. I mean, it's sort of an undercroft. It's not quite high enough. You have to stoop a little bit. But in the modern case now, where people sometimes park a small car in the premises under the house, before going up to the main door via a short staircase, people normally leave their shoes on the stone slab on the ground, and they wash their feet with water provided in an earthenware pot or tempayan. Now, this tradition of removing your shoes and before you enter somebody's house is very much an Asian tradition, and these have even been brought into our office environments, where some offices have arrangements where you remove your shoes outside. The Japanese and most Asian societies will do that. So these pots that are put by the side, mainly from China, they are earthenware pots called a tempayan, and there's a little coconut scoop to just get a bit of water to wash off the mud off your feet. I have found this old picture in the year 1919 in Singapore. Now, this is a kampung house. The postcard actually describes it as a native bungalow, but it's in Singapore in 1919. Here you'll see the material as it was originally used. It's timber. The planks that form the side of the building are made of just hard tropical timbers like balau. Then the roof, you'll notice, is pitched to keep the rains off, and it has a sort of atap covering. Atap is actually a woven leaf of nipa palms, and they are lashed together and tied to almost like thatch, you know, in the European setting of, say, in England, where you have an English thatch cottage. This is our local equivalent of nipa palms. Now, the environment, as I said, this is basically the compound in which these houses are set. Now, the basic house of a Malay, of the basic form of a Malay house is that there's a rumah ibu, which is the main house, and adjacent to it is a rumah dapur, which is where the kitchens are. Now, if you can see from this picture, the house is placed in the middle amidst a clump of trees, usually coconut trees. And then they have a simple garden in front, which allows for a nice, warm, welcoming, you know, flowering bushes and maybe even some edibles, you know, like chilies and things like that. A very attractive, warm thing, and welcoming gesture to a guest or to the family members. And the coconut tree, of course, is most useful because it's used for making food or shade. They make instruments. They may even use it as steps for going up one level. The atap roof is, of course, made from 2 or 3 types of leaves. One from nipa palm. Sometimes they use bird thumb tree, like in Perak, quite a lot with using bird thumb. Now, the toilets are not within the house. It's usually located as a separate outhouse and a shower area, outhouse away from the house. And it's a sort of a simple latrine. And sometimes it could be perched over a body of water, a pond or a stream. Then there is a well adjacent to the house where you could get water for washing clothes and bathing and so on. And drainage is just left for, the rains are just thrown off the building and it lands on the area around it. So if there's any, there's no gutter, so to speak, to bring the rainwater down. There's normally a huge deluge in the afternoon. A lot of water comes down in a hurry. And then, so the site has to be fairly level and without areas where you're given to ponding. Next. So these are pictures. These are pictures. Just now was just a simple illustration. Here's a simple example. So it's a grass entrance, some stone steps to help you along, and the atap. On the left, it shows the atap untrimmed. On the other side, is the atap trimmed, and the building, as you can see, is basically a boxes-like building with a pitch roof top and large overhangs and lower roofs. Next. Now, across the building, this is a cross section showing how cleverly they have adapted for the local climate. Now, this structure is basically a highly sustainable building, in my opinion, because it uses passive solar control to mediate between the hot, wet, humid weather outside and the interior, where it's much, much cooler. Now, this is achieved mainly by having a high porosity or permeability. That means the walls that constitute the sides of the building is punctuated, it's perforated to allow air to go through. It could have large windows, which there's a cross ventilation across the building. Then below the ground, there's also another bit of air that comes right through, and it lifts up against the floorboards. I've had stayed in some of these houses before. At night, it's very cool because the boards are not with tongue in groove sort of thing. They're just butt jointed and there are gaps there. So the air comes all around you, from the sides and from the bottom up, and right at ceiling level, higher level, there's air breezing right through. So it's very, very open. And these low thermal capacity materials, these things do not absorb heat. If you were from a temperate climate situation, you want a building with high thermal capacity where it can absorb the heat and then maybe radiate the heat into the house to heat it up in winter. In the case of Malaysia, we have summer all year round. And in fact, our job is more to keep the temperature down to more comfortable, manageable levels. So the large pitch roof acts a bit like an umbrella. Okay, basically the job is just to throw the water away and far away from the sites, and therefore you have large overhangs, which also keeps away the glare. It keeps the sun is relentless and there's a lot of glare. And so what happens, the inside of these houses tend to be a bit underlit, in my opinion. But that's the charm. When it's the hottest part of the day, you would actually go to the darkest shadow because visually you feel you'll be cooled in that area. So the picture on the top right, the picture on the top right shows an interior where the quality of the light and the ventilation goes through. You can see the floor is wooden. The site, in this case, this is a Kutai house in Perak, and perforated is all woven bark from the batam tree. There's no ceiling to this house. I'll show more pictures of it later on. Next. Now, this is basically a picture I put together to show you the contrast between the language used for the architecture. Here is a design language of the tropics, which is an architecture of line, edge and shade, which contrasts against the Palladian European one of form, volume, and shadow. You see the buildings are solid and massive, the fenestrations are smaller, the openings are smaller, the windows and doors are smaller. So in the tropics, what we want to achieve is actually very thin line and edge, so it's almost like a screen, a perforated screen. And the air breezes through and very comfortable. Therefore, it becomes very light. It's almost like a bird cage. You can feel the air being blown through. So the quality of lighting inside the building is also different because it's layered and the shadows are delicious. Next. Now, let me just take you through how you would go through the interior spaces of a traditional Malay house. Now, this is a typical Malay house, a modest house. The plan is laid out in two main areas. There's a male section and there's also a female section. The male section is the front of the house, obviously. So you arrive at the main entrance, which is at the porch, or in Malay it's described as anjong. Now this area is a semi-public, semi-private space because you have not entered the house yet. There's a roof that extends from the top down over your head, and you get this sense of being half in and half outside the house, and you could talk to somebody casually walking past the house, have a conversation without actually entering the house. Now, the equivalent sort of spaces in other Asian contexts would be, say, the mah, the intermediate space in a Japanese house, very similar. From there, you open to the front door, and then you arrive at a sort of corridor-like space. It's a front covered veranda. In Malay, it's described as a serambi. Now, this serambi is a serambi gantung because it's hanging off. It's what you call it? It's not the same level as the main body of the house. From there, you lead on to the main portion of the house, is what's called the rumah ibu. We'll describe it later. Then the main portion of the house is then connected to the rear extension, a separate wing or arm, which is connected by this corridor or passage called the selang. Now there's usually a side entrance which is used by the female. This area onwards becomes a female domain. The selang and the rumah tengah, the middle portion, plus the rumah dapur, which is a kitchen. And when you look at the plan, you'll find that it's a very multifunctional open plan space. You use, the use changes, with different times of the day and the year. Mixed use, you'll find that it's very flexible. There's also a minimum amount of partitions and interior walls. Therefore, in modern terms, we call it a very open plan. It's not cellular. cubicle spaces. And therefore, by doing this sort of simple layout, you have a situation where the space is very flexible. It provides good ventilation because the rooms are not cellular. In fact, it's one continuous open space which flows into the other. And then the lighting is more evenly distributed around the house. Here's an enlargement again. You can see the Anjong. Now the Serambi Gantung, as we said, is where is a formal reception area for male guests. They will sit there and have a discussion, and sometimes a child may sleep in that area. Then the levels are adjusted to delineate the importance of the space. Now the Rumah Ibu is normally elevated about 7 inches off the Serambi Gantung, and it's just a slightly raised plane, wooden floors again, and you have a variety of activities there. One corner of it may have a little screen-off area where the adult has a bed which he sleeps on. A corner to the back, there's another covered veranda, which is Sama Naik. It's the same level as the Rumah Ibu. And then you have a meeting area where you could do a variety of things. You could sleep there, you could study there, you could have a meeting, you could have a jamuan, a big feast, a kenduri there, or you could do some housekeeping work. If you're doing some work about weavings or doing stuff, ironing your clothes, all that could happen in this Rumah Ibu. Here is an illustration which I've to show you what the interior feels like. This part on the top is the Serambi Gantung. You'll find that the levels of the building, you'll find the balustrade somewhat low when you stand up. It's mainly because in earlier times, people sat on the floor. They sat on mengkuang mats, tikar, and carpets later. Therefore, you don't want the balustrade to block your view, especially at your eye level. It's slightly lower than in the Anjung area. The second illustration at the bottom shows the main space, the most important, the highest level, which is the Rumah Ibu. And right in the center, there's this king equivalent of an English king post in a half-timbered house. Here we have the main pole, which is the one that holds up the whole structure in terms of the spiritual aspects of the building. We'll go into that later, but you can see that here modern intrusions have come into the space. It is informal, but the floor now is covered with a layer of lino, which is easier to maintain and clean, and just requires a bit of sweeping wiping. Next, okay, here is a blow up at the rear portion of the house. You go across the passageway, which is called a selang. It also has a roof over it, and the women in the household would sit there and chat or do some general work around there. The kitchen right at the back is where the cooking is done and the washing up is done. And you look at the top right-hand corner, there's a wash-up platform where it's just slatted timbers where water will it's like a drying rack. Most of the activities happen on the floor. There's hardly any furniture which elevates it higher. So as said earlier, there are mainly 3 zones. One is the formal reception area, the Anjung and Serambi, which is considered the male portion of the house. Then the private living, which is the Rumah Ibu, where family members and certain guests may be invited in. And then right at the back is the female portion, where you have the cooking, and the ladies will gather at the back. So they have a separate entrance near the selang. There are flight of steps there as well. And it's also a covered area where you can have conversations and chit chat. So this change in level is based on an open sequence, which is experienced by change in volume of the space, or by levels, rather than by partitions which could delineate it. In those days, people were less formal. They could hang a piece of cloth, you know, like a curtain to delineate a line, a curtain line. Here's a picture of the selang that was mentioned earlier, the side entrance. There, the roof extends down with a little prop to hold up the roof coming down. And children like to hang around here. They can sit there, they can play games, and they're not far off from the watchful eye of the parents. And the bottom picture shows the kitchen at the rear. Again, eating is off the floor, hardly any furniture around. The cooking is, of course, done standing up. But they could also prepare the food sitting on the floor. And you can see the presence of the mat, the tikar, Hong mats and so on. So people were very comfortable in those days, sitting basila, you know, sitting with your crossed legs. Nowadays, most of us used to more modern living would ask for a chair. At the rear portion is a, this is a variation, sorry. This is a variation. The silang could be enlarged to form a courtyard, you know, with a separate entrance. And this becomes a part of the compound, the inner compound, where the ladies do their washing and they hang the clothes to dry and so on. This is a form which is peculiar to Malacca, the Malaccan house, Malaccan Malay house. This is a setting of, again, Langkawi, where the sea used to arrive here. This is a Malay house also relocated, where the water was reclaimed, and now you have a sea of bulrushes. You know. But the house stands on stilts, which adjust to the level of the terrain. As the ground falls, the stumps, the concrete stumps, just gets longer, while the house is on the same level. I mean, it's on the same plane. And these houses are flexible. They could be moved around by just basically lifting it off and carrying it away. But you can see the bucolic setting, very open. The boundaries are all, there's no visual boundary. You can see as far as the eye can see to the mountains in the distance and the end of the paddy field, and it's very open. So the terrace there is the Serambi, where you have the discussions under covered space. Here's another example of a house also in Langkawi, where there's an atap roof. The boards are weathered over the years. They are not painted. Painting became a fashion when the Europeans arrived, and they painted the houses in brighter colors. But the natural wood, which is weathered, is to my mind quite attractive, the patina of old age. So as you arrive through the steps, you arrive at the Anjong, which leads up another flight of stairs. This, in this case, split into two small flights, and then the main door. Now the window on the left there, it shows the Serambi, the entrance area is the Serambi, and the plants. The plants is a good landscape setting for this house. Very modest house. Here is another example, slightly bigger, and it explains the same thing. You have this flight of stairs that leads up to an anjong, which is a covered space, half in, half out. You've not entered the house yet. The front door has not been, you've not gone past the front door. And you can have conversations, have a party, have meals. You eat anywhere and everywhere, because there's no designated space for dining, shall we say, in those days. Then the atap roof. Now the atap roof needs, of course, to be replaced every now and then when they're worn out. Again, take a note of the house just sitting comfortably on stumps, which keeps a constant level. Next. This is a beautiful house which was relocated into this resort. The swimming pool, of course, is new, and the sun deck, chairs and all that, they are new. But the house, as you can see, is again very modest. You go through the Anjung area, up a flight of stairs. The undercroft of the house is tall enough to accommodate some good storage things. But you can see that the house has a tile roof. Now these tile roofs were mainly Chinese type of tiles, unglazed, and clay tiles, and they form ridges and valleys which help to channel the water out. No gutters, the water is just thrown off because the pitch is kind of steep, and this is a Lima house, the roof form, because it's been influenced by Western styles of housing. The sides, if you see above the windows, the full height windows, they have jalousies, shutters which are open, as a group, wooden shutters which allow air in, and above the windows are over panels which are beautifully carved and allow light and air to go through. The intricacies can be seen when you go close up to it. Now here's a much grander house. This is in Malimau. This is the Penghulu's house. This is the chieftain's house, Penghulu Natar. In Malacca, the fashion for tiling the front steps, which used to be just plaster, like you can see the two planter boxes on the side, they became very fashionable when England were producing them in the factories. You could instantly decorate your house, and they have this fashion of putting it on all the steps, and very colorful, and that's called the Malaccan steps. A generous, inviting flight of steps that lead you up. In this case, this house is a very grand anjung. The seating area is very big. You can have a big party down there, so to speak. Next. Here we are back to our building within the premises of Badan Warisan's Heritage Center. You have a storm where the windows are all shut, and you can see the rain just pelting down. The underside of the house, of course, they just put sand, which helps with the drainage, and it drains quite well. Anyway, the house is quite lofty. This is a very unusual house. It originated from Kedah, up in the north. It was left in a rather derelict condition, and Badan Warisan acquired it many years ago in the 90s and restored it fully, and it's now open as a museum to see how the way of life was maintained in these old heritage houses. Next. Here are the typical Malay Malaccan type house, where you have the intrusion this time of modern materials. It became very costly, very difficult to get the roofs repaired constantly because of things falling through it, causing water to penetrate, and then it starts to leak. So when zinc roofs were made available, it was just put on top of all these atap and planks which were rotten or whatever. And it makes it quite unattractive, but what to do? The other problem was that these metal had high thermal capacity. They actually absorb a lot of the heat and start to radiate into these houses. They were very hot and most uncomfortable. And besides that, the noise, when there's a storm, it's quite hard to have a conversation. You can see the side entrance here at the Selang on the left. Next. Here I have a quick shot of a Terengganu version of the same thing. In Terengganu, they have a beautiful traditional house. The form is more elevated than the other areas like Johor or Selangor. The steps going up are separated into two short flights with an intermediate platform, that's the Anjung. The roof comes down and covers it. These influences are more Thai. Thai influences. The carvings, if you could afford it, the upper portion of the wall panels are beautifully carved with inlay wooden panels. And they stain with oil to handle the termite infestation. If you were very, very rich, you could afford to have chengai, which has got natural sap in it. That deters termites. Next. Here are other examples in Malacca. I think this is Malacca. There's a grand flight of stairs that invites you to the Anjung, and then on the left is a Serambi. Small house, but the main components are there. Again, you can see the tempayan on the side to help you. And here they've actually put a perimeter drain to help to drain the water away from the house. On the right is a rumah kutai. Kutai is actually short for kotai, which means of great age, 100 years maybe, you know, so a senior house, shall we say, it's rumah kutai in Perak. The woven panels are of the batam bark, and the ceiling is, the roof is of batam leaves as opposed to the bark. Next. Here's another example of another kotai house. You see the patterns of the weave, quite attractive, made into smaller panels. So it's a framework which keeps the very, very thin wall. It's almost like those Japanese houses where you have paper thin walls in the soji screen. The roof is slightly blown off at a ridge there, so water is going in, and this house is in a state of dereliction and would collapse anytime, unfortunately. Next. There are very few of these houses still left in Perak. This example was done, there's some research done by quite a lot of students. This was 2016, and somebody did the measurement of the house. You can see the plan of the house shows a flight of stairs from the right, bottom right, which arrives at the landing or the anjung, which then goes to the main porch area, one step up. Then you enter the front door, which allows you to move into the front veranda or the serambi. Then there's a middle area, and then there's the rear portion. This whole thing in the middle would be the rumah ibu. And there's a mini room there. I believe the bedroom will be there with walls. And then through the passage, which is also covered, the salang is covered. You have a side entrance there, the ladies' portion of the house, and then the dapur and kitchen at the back. So that's the general form and the lay of the house. Next. Interior, what it looks like. As I said, it's very sparsely furnished. Here, very modest as well. You have a couple of larders, those old-fashioned larders on the sides. Light comes brightly into the house. The floor, because you're sitting on the floor, that little work table where there's a tudung, you know, cover for food is just slightly above ground level, where you sit, you know, cross-legged on the floor. Next. Other shots of the same house, the kitchen area, the bedroom on the left. As I said earlier, there is a curtain to just delineate an opening. Sometimes there's a door, of course, which is left open, and then the curtain is used to demarcate that space. And in this case, there's a decoration of some Islamic saying above. You can see the house is very perforated. The air blows right through. And consequently, there's also this element of privacy. It's very easy for your voice to travel from your bedroom to your kitchen. So as a consequence, people were more soft-spoken in those days. You didn't raise your voice, you spoke softly and gently. Next. Here are other examples of houses in the region. Different styles, different variations on the theme. But you can see more or less the same language being used. A wooden house of one level on stilts, sitting on concrete bases. The inside, everything is wooden. The floorboards are wooden, the walls are wooden. And then the rooftop is made of either tiles, which came later, or it was a clay, sort of a woven atap. Next. Now, this is a beautiful house in Langkawi. This is where the legend of Mashuri, that princess who was killed, unfortunately. This is supposed to be her house. You can see how beautifully done up it is with carvings. At the gable end, there you have the carvings showing there's a bird, there's a crescent and a star. And the windows, as I said, it's divided into a lower balustrade. The above, the over panels, beautiful traceries of timber. Then on the right is more using the batam sort of woven weave walls for for the rumah dapur, for the kitchen at the back. Now the house in Langkawi is much higher. They're nearer the north. They're much influences from the Thai and Patani culture. They raised the floor higher. The reason I believe is because once in 100 years, the flood waters actually reach up to that level, whereas the rest of the peninsula, you don't actually go so high up. 5 feet up is more than adequate. Next. Here's another picture of the same house. So as I said, the house is big enough and tall enough whereby you can actually sit on the lower level. They raise another level up for people to sit above the ground level. Next.
Bane, you have another 5 minutes.
Okay, I'll run through very quickly then. So here you have pictures of the house. Next. Inside, you show a very airy feeling. Next. Sorry, I can't. Wait. Next. Here's a modern version of the Malay house. Next. This plan shows the different types of house forms throughout the states, because in the Malay world, some are Bugis from Sulawesi, some are from Palembang, they come from Minang culture, so they brought their own versions of Malay house. Up north, the influences from the north. Next. This shows the different main types of roof forms. You have the bumbung panjang, a long roof. You have the bumbung lima. Next. Bumbung perak with Western influences. Then you have bumbung limas, which is more for mosques, the five-sided pyramidal form. Next. You have a selang house where the selang is elongated. You have, these are extensions to the house. The house is, because it's prefabricated in timber, you can extend it almost like an IKEA sort of thing. You can add on, add and subtract to the house as the needs grow. Gajah menyusu is like the mother elephant feeding its young. Next. Courtyard house, the Minangkabau house, which we touched on earlier. Next. The Minangkabau roof. Now, there's a very interesting ritual of how they locate the house. They get the village shaman or bomo who will say prayers and use a spirit kemenyan to engage with the unseen world. The mother of the house, the ibu of the house, the woman of the house, actually she measures her outstretched hands as a unit of a depa. Then a string is used as a measurement, and that the bomo then ties it to this rod, and they'll say more prayers, and then next time say more prayers. Next. Then he'll stick it in the ground, and they'll plant it with a pail of water, full of water, and then they say more prayers again. And the next morning, they will take off the string and measure it again, whether the string is lengthened or shortened. If it's shortened, then it's no go. That space is not good for putting a house. Same with the water. If the water has spilled over, not so good. Sorry. If the water has spilled over, it means there's good, there's plenty. Then you would use that site. If the house is long, then it's good. So that site where that stake was stuck will become the exact site where the tiang seri, the main king post of the house, is located. Next. Let's run through very quickly. The king post has got all the rituals of white for purity, the cloths which are put on top of the post, and then you have a piece of red for prosperity, and then the black is for mysterious, the realm of the unseen. This on all the posts, you have all these 3 cloths layered, and the king post, it can be quite elaborate. They can be beautifully decorated with color as well. So raising the tiang, they use a system of pulleys and rope. Now, in the tiang seri is the middle of the house, in the mid portion of the rumah ibu. Next. Here's a very elaborate tiang seri in the Medimau house. There's a flight of stairs, maybe go upstairs to what's called the loteng, which is an attic. If the ceiling is high, there's an attic where young girls, when they reach puberty, they sleep upstairs. And in this case, the backdrop there is a pelamin, a very grand ornate pelamin. Next. These are just additional possibilities where you can enlarge the house infinitely. Many options. Next. Next, these are examples. The Serambi added on, the Selang added on, and so on. The Gajah Menyusu versions. Next. Yeah. So these are just versions of it. Go on. I'm running out of time. Next. Anjung editions. The sequences as a family expands, they just add on. Next. So there's a bucolic setting, the coconut palms, very green, and then in the shade of the tree, the kids play in the compound. There are no fences. There are no visible delineation. Next. Houses informally placed. This is a Terengganu version. Next. The sequence on construction and timber construction, those who are interested, there are lots of material available, books written on it and studies made. Timber construction, no nails, they use wooden dowels called beji. Next. And the sequence of erecting the house, the king post first. The things are all prefabricated, brought to site and just erected as panels. Next. And then there's a whole sequence where they reach up to the top. There are intermediate platforms put in temporarily, and then the roof is put on. Next. Here's a detailed breakdown. There's the tebalaya with the sun motif. That is the gable ends. Gable ends. Next. What the inside looks like. So sometimes the doorway is children's height. They use it like a screen to stop the kids from going out. You'll notice even the curtains are very filigree. They're like very soft piece of cloth. Next. These are other details of the Malay house, the fenestration, the carvings. Next. The end, the tebalaya or gable ends, sunrise motif, sunburst rather. They are also used as ventilation panels, the openings there. Next. And the Malaccan steps, and the bottom right is the para, which is where I told you in the kitchens, they use it for dripping and draining the washed utensils. Next. Okay, the house, you see, in the geomancy of a Malay house, it's not fixed. You can carry the house and shift it somewhere else. It's not like the Chinese feng shui where they're so determined that you put it in a certain angle in a certain place or specific location. So the whole kampung gets together in the community spirit of so-called gotong royong. They will lift the house, carry it across to another part of the village. Next. Say you marry into the family, they will carry it and live next to your in-laws, with your in-laws. Entire Perak Kampung here comes together to move a wooden house in that usung rumah tradition. So in the Malay lifestyle, it was very much a community spirit. There's a sense of becoming part of a same kampung, sekampung. Next. Next. Here is a modern resort in Langkawi, the way of the future, where somebody has incorporated these old ideas and interpreted it in new structures. Some are old, some are new, and laid very informally in this beautiful landscape setting. Next. Resort. Here's their version of a Malacca. Everything, you see the stumps are bigger size, the staircase is elongated and grand. It's a modern interpretation of a traditional Malay house, but it's all done in wood. The roof is much heavier with clay tiles. Next. Here's an elderly couple still living in the old Malay house, another version of it. The steps are grander with a staircase and a balustrade. Next. And this is an illustration of Istana Tunku Nik, built in 1981, ink painting by Kasim Abbas. This house was relocated in the Terengganu Museum. It's there if you want to visit it. Next. Just to end, I would like to show you a selection of slides. This is a beautiful cluster of about 10 houses ranging from about 100 to 160 years, which was collected by Allahyarham Tunku Ismail Tunku Su of Terengganu. And on a family piece of land, he erected this and sort of created this, almost like a palace, next. And this is what it looks like at the ground level. There's a lady winnowing some rice. Next. Very country setting, and from the balustrades, from the Serambi, the veranda, you look out, these all country activities. Next. Rural activities. Next. The roof tiles are Singora tiles, overlapping clay tiles, unglazed. The midsection where the grand entrance is, again, as I said, the stairs are split into two, not one grand staircase up, half flights up to a platform. Next. Close up, this is what I mean. This is at the height when it was in good shape and lived in. The tempayan at the right where you wash your feet, the floor is tiled. So he had a lot of activities and events. Next, Tunku Ismail was had a songket business. He had a factory that wove all these beautiful songkets. Now this is the inside of that main house, where on the left is where his bedroom area is. The floors, furniture being put in, and color. The backdrop is very neutral. He's put in some Japanese screens because he had some time in Japan where he appreciated this quality of light being brought in. Next. And beautiful artifacts to adorn the house. Next. So this is another view of the same space. Next. This is the bedroom area. You can see the fenestration, the carved panels, the air comes in, the light comes in, delicious shadows, beautiful, intricate stuff. Very, very well done. Next. The color comes from the fabrics that were used and the flooring material and the clothes worn, you know, the sarongs and the tops and so on. Some lighting brought in, some wiring, modern invention of electricity was introduced into the old Malay house. This is his study area, sitting area. Next. Next. This is the open main entrance, the Rumah Kuala Ibai. He had a collection of about 10 houses put together as a cluster. Next. Next. So this is one corner of it where the sitting area and the dining room on the right. Next. Here's a view of the dining room with all these paintings and pictures on the side. Chairs were put in and a table. So the area of sitting is elevated up. In the Terengganu type house, the ceilings are much loftier. So the building is sort of in scale with the new furniture. Some of the other houses, when you put in furniture, somehow the scale goes funny. You know, it's not quite right. You need to sit on the floor where the ceiling is 3 feet higher. Next. The bedroom, he's painted one of these old panel walls white to bring more light in. Rumah Tase, and then the outside view. Next. This is a house when you're still quite well kept. Next. The mid portion. Next. Now, unfortunately, this is a location near the river. It's been left derelict. He started this great venture in the 1990s, but he unfortunately died in 2010 or 11, I believe. And the house has been left abandoned and derelict. It's very sad. Next. There's a view, a drone view of it. Total state of disrepair. Next. Next. So with our architecture, our heritage architecture, you have to seriously consider what lessons we can learn from the past to take forward to the future, and rather than just let it just go like that. Next. Here's it where the landscape is taking over. Next. Next. That's it.
Thank you very much, Bane. That was a wonderful talk and presentation. A 1 hour presentation never does justice. There's so much information and that needs to be, that can be talked about and discussed. So I'm sorry that our format is limiting in that sense, but there's a lot of interest in your talk and a lot of questions. So I'll jump straight in. And my apologies to some of the participants. I'm grouping the questions under the different topics that it's been asked. And Bane, if you could just perhaps, because of timing, keep your replies and responses brief.
I'll try my
Okay,
best.
good. All right. So the first one is from Siu Eng Chua, and Alex Vidam and Philip from Bangi also talked about it. But the question relates to pest control, mosquitoes and other animals with all the openness in these houses. How do these houses take care of that?
That, I think the answer straightforwardly is to live with it. In earlier times, you say a house like you say in Bali, the same thing. They're all open pavilions. There are no walls, so the wind blows in. It not only brings in fresh air, it brings in the dust and the grime. We happen to be in the city. There's a layer of grease on the top of your dust. So mosquitoes abound, but they tend to proliferate at about the early part of dusk, around 7 o'clock. So that's when you put out all your mosquito coils. In these houses, you live with mosquito nets. You hang it from the ceiling and it covers the whole thing. In between, you'll use whatever natural herbs, citronella, that sort of thing, to keep them off. But they proliferate around that time. After that, it's more manageable for some reason. So pests is part and parcel of living in the forest. If you don't tend to it, the forest takes over. The jungle takes over, in a nutshell.
Yeah, I've lived in some kampong houses when I was growing up in Kemaman, Terengganu, and they keep the land, the house that I stayed in, the owners kept the ground very clean, and yes. They also use coconut husks and the smoke from that to sort of yes. Provide some kind of protection against mosquitoes, and they don't have any water areas which are where water can collect, kind of thing.
Yeah. Same. I mean, most of us were grown up going camping, in the wilds and all. You know what to do. You have to cope with it. It's part and parcel of it. But the worst thing is more there are snakes, there are insects that fly in, there are beetles, there are all sorts of stuff. It's not just the mosquitoes. But if you live in harmony with nature, that's the thing.
Excellent. Now, another question, the next question rather, is from C.S. Tan from Selangor. He's got a very good question. What determines the elevation height of the house?
I think that is to do with the dapa, as you say, the mother of the house. Now, it's very matrilinear. The women are the important person. So the householder, the lady's outstretched arms, or the English call it a fathom, is between, that's called a depa. And I think there's a certain ratio of how many depas, then is a nice number. It is good for the Tiang Seri, so to speak. They have their own ways of doing it. The carpenters, the skills of the carpenter plus the geomancer would dictate the size and height of the house. People were smaller in those days. That's why you notice that some of the houses are much smaller scale. We've grown bigger and taller. But the Terengganu houses, I've always noted that they're much taller, loftier, because of this flood situation, as I said. They have a whole 1 story higher. Then how deep is the Chitra toilet hole? Basically, it's just a wooden platform with a hole in the middle, and then there's an open latrine. As a small child, I've used those latrines before. It's quite scary. Sometimes it could be over a pond, near a pond, and then you've got tilapia down there feeding off your waste. But in those days, you either had a dry latrine like this. There's no water closet. These WCs came much later in Victorian times. So people lived with the smell. They actually made compost, and they recycled it and get some fuel out of it.
Yeah, and the toilets were always placed in. They understood how the air flew, the air flows of the area, and you would place the toilets away from the direction of the wind.
That's right. But you must understand, at night you have to get across that space, and if it was raining, to go there, and it's slippery, and it's just a simple box-shaped thing, 5 feet by 5 feet, with the roof there, and you're quite alone there. And you got to handle a lamp. You have to handle, using the toilet, and you have to use your hands.
Okay, CS Tan from Selangor also, there's also issues about construction, and you mentioned not using nails, and so how could the nipa roof withstand wear and tear, and how are they connected?
Decoration.
Yeah,
for decoration, but they do last. I mean, you can't be doing it every year. It's quite a few years.
Okay, good.
Okay. Quite a few years.
And the other thing too is that these roofs are in constant maintenance. They every so often, maybe a year or so, they get replaced, and the community are working on stitching these roofs together.
That's right. That's right. So the insects eat it. The insects eat it. A coconut could fall on it. Debris from above, or the wind could blow it off. So it's a constant exercise of having to repair it. The one in the Terengganu house, they use Singgora tile, diamond-shaped tiles. They break, they're very brittle, so water penetrates through. So the modern version is where they put a corrugated sheet underneath in mineral fiber, and you put the tiles for decoration above. Then on the undercroft, you could decorate with more woven matting and so on.
Yeah. The other thing I know is that the houses on the East Coast, because they're facing heavier winds and stronger rains and all, they are more robust and more rooted to the ground. And then the ones on the West Coast, where it's not so difficult.
One way of seeing
lighter
that,
walls.
One way of seeing the Anand is actually the angle of the coconut tree. I mean, there's no wind blowing, but they're all in one angle because there's strong wind coming from the sea. So you know which way the wind blows, and you arrange, as you said earlier on. The thing is that they have to be more robust. In the case of, you go to like North Borneo, they use Berlian, which is iron wood. It's really amazing. That's the only wood I know. You can stick it in the beach, with no treatment. They can take salt water. It's very powerful. So you use good, strong, durable material. The answer is that. Changai and all that. An average one will have to be replaced. You have to oil it.
Shanaz Yusuf, I'm not sure where she's from, but she's asked, are the traditional Malay houses on the peninsula typically built on any directional axis, facing south or facing the sea or facing Mecca, etc.?
No, the prayer area faces Mecca, but because it depends on where you are on the place. You see how can you orientate towards Mecca? And in those days, it's just a small compass, holding your hand. I think they just follow the lay of the land, as you suggested just now. They follow the winds, the wind direction. The craftsman actually builds it. You just tell them, I need these sort of spaces. They have their own measurement, how many rooms, how many tiangs, how many columns, 36 tiang or 12 tiang, how many posts will constitute the size of the house. In a way that the Japanese house is measured by the tatami mats. How many mats to form the
Siwing Chua has another question. He's about the social structure of these houses, and he says that it seems like patriarchy is built into the architecture or reinforced, and I guess that's correct, right?
Yes. Patriarchy, because I mean, the community, the head of the household, the men are up front, the ladies are at the back portion. And so sometimes you remember last time when Lat used to draw his cartoons and show the life in a Malay kampung, and this hero of his little short script peeps, and sees this beautiful girl, peering from behind, from the female portion, looking into this discussion up front amongst the men, and then later in day-to-day life, she bumps into her along the street and knocks her and recognizes her. So the women are kept at the rear portion of the house in their domain. The men are up front. Now this is a way of life for the Malays, even before the advent of Islam. Now in the construction of the house, they had this rituals which are animistic, going back to Hindu Buddhistic Hindu culture, which predated Islam. It was 1,000 years recently.
Excellent. Alex Vidam, I'm not sure where he's from, has two questions, which if it's okay, I'll answer them. His first one is, are there any recommendations about good books about the subject? The answer would be, Badan Warisan Malaysia has a wonderful library in our premises. It's called the Chen Wun Fee Resource Center. And there are lots of good books about heritage buildings and traditional Malay houses. And where's the best location to see some things, some of these? The small towns in Malaysia have lots of it, but in Badan Warisan Malaysia, on our location, we have one traditional Malay house. It's called the Rumah Abu Seman, and it can be viewed on Tuesdays to Fridays at 3 to 5. Best to make an appointment, and you can call Badan Warisan and come and visit. It's a beautiful old house.
Can I just add? There's a seminal book by Mr. Lim Ji Yuan in 1987. He wrote a book called The Malay House: Rediscovering Malaysia's Indigenous Shelter System. It's an excellent book, very informative and very authoritative.
And the Gillick book too. Right?
Gillick also wrote. There in literature you see a lot, and then in our local academic institutions, lots and lots of papers have been written, measured drawings done. You just have to ask around. But even on the net, if you just ask casual questions or Google, a lot of things come to play. Pictures, all sorts of stuff. But there are buildings which have access to. If you go into the kampongs, they will be more than delighted to welcome you. They're very friendly.
Yeah, if you drive from in Teluk Intan, Sungai Petani, Teluk Intan, what other towns in Perak? You can see lots of it, and also in Negeri Sembilan. Philip in Bangi, he has a question about termites or anti-termites and protection.
Well, termites. Okay, this is a very interesting thing. You know, many years ago, when you did termite treatment to your ground, they gave you a 10-year warranty. 10-year warranty that nothing will happen to your timber structure. Then what happened was that the people who were applying it were indiscriminately damaging the soil. They put too much, they killed everything in sight. So that the government had to start regulating it because they were overdoing it. And the worst part was you're starting to leach to the water table of people, so it's quite scary. So after that, they were not allowed to put such strong doses, and that's why most of these termite treatment people would tell you to give you only a year's warranty. You have to do it annually. Then there was another way where they dug a hole and put some poison stuff, which they hoped the termites would take back to their hive and kill the queen termite, so to speak, when they pass the food to them. But I prefer to have a more simple approach, which was suggested by this director of the Sarawak Museum once when I had a conversation with her. She said that the old Malay houses in the kampongs, how did they survive all these termites? Well, the answer was to give it some soft option for the plants, for the animals to bite the cellulose of, say, banana palms in the area. They're just going to eat that stuff. Why go and eat all the way into hard timbers when you can have the soft option nearby? So that's why you see there's a proliferation of banana palms around the kampong. And I thought that sounded quite plausible, that you give them a decoy or give them something easy to do.
Yeah,
low-lying fruit, so to speak.
The other thing also is in a traditional Malay house, they use a lot of traditional methods as well, organic grinding of leaves and things from the jungles to create the oils, and these oils are the ones that are used to treat the timbers and
yes,
stop it from rotting and
that's right. In fact, just to answer, I just noticed Sue Ying's question about why the Terengganu houses are darker. Is it the wood or the method of treating? Yes, it's to do with the treatment. They oil it. They use sunflower oil, or what's called tang yu, oil. They used to wood it at the bottom of a boat, the wooden hull of a boat. They would actually oil it to make it buoyant.
Yeah,
and that's the same stuff that they put on the walls of this timber,
yeah.
and it weathers very, very well. So my answer is to go for the traditional. It's time tested, it works, but it needs renewal. Nothing's forever. You need to give a new coat of oil over it. All your furniture, you have to work at it. You cannot just leave it to its own.
Correct.
Dry out, and so on.
What's also fascinating is the traditions of boat building is so related to the tradition of house building. So the people who work on boats and the methods they use are also used on these traditional houses.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
The tradition of boat building
Ah.
and also that of house building.
Yeah, because you basically have to keep the water, keep the boat buoyant, so it doesn't sink, because the woods are heavy. So they make it watertight. They line it with this layer of oil, which is seep, they rub it into the grain of the oil, into the wood itself, and then it floats. But the tradition will be more, it's going with the flow. You want a boat that cuts through the water, glides through the water. So likewise, when you do the form of the building, you don't want to be like a wind. You want to build in the lee of the wind, shall we say? Yeah. You want to have a form that is not clashing with it. You go with the flow. Bend with the wind, roll with the punch, so to speak. You go with nature. But it's highly sustainable. Now, what we fail to forget is that nowadays we talk a lot about carbon footprint. All the materials are used within the vicinity of the house. You use things around your area. And the Malay lifestyle was to be very modest, to be very simple. It was not ostentatious. People were very understated. They were not going for loud colors. They were not allowed conspicuous consumption of things. Life was very easy. This was bountiful. Nature was bountiful. Your fruit. Just go down there. Your durian is doing things for you. Your bananas. Everything's available. You go down the pond. There's fish available. There's no need to work so hard. It's a bountiful life. So people were more laid back, very simple, very elegant in my mind. And there was no need to be shouting about it. So even the palaces were very similar in size to the average house of India, because that was the lifestyle.
Juliana Ahmad has a question about Malay houses in Negeri Sembilan. So she wants to know if has there been a lot of work on studying and researching this traditional?
Yeah, there has been a lot, because that one would be the Minang culture. So they have what's called a Minangkabau roof, where the edges or the ends of these long houses, rumah bumbung, is curved out like a tando, like the horns of a buffalo. Yeah. So if you go to Sri Menanti, there's a palace there, but that was done 1900s, and they introduced it's a multi-story structure. But the general form and layout were at the ends of the long Serambi, there's a raised dais, because it's a royal level. You can see even the handrail goes up one level. It blends in with the whole thing. The ideas are subtly incorporated inside. The form may vary slightly, but you do not lose the essence of the house. Nowadays, people want to put, fully air conditioned. They have frameless glass assemblies, and they put the aircon at full blast. So you have water condensation problems where the water is dew point. The water condensates, and the whole thing streaks down the side of the wall, because the outside temperature is much hotter than the other side. So you'll find that you have to either make a commitment and say, I want to live in harmony with nature, or not at all. I mean, I personally, for instance, I avoid air conditioning unless I have no choice when it's overly hot. Most of the time, I just use a small fan to circulate the air around me. And I wear light clothes, simple sarong and a t-shirt. That's it. Singlet or t-shirt. That's all you need in the tropics,
Good. Chan Kai Hong has asked about dimensions and stilts. I think that's covered already. Yeah. The next one is Siweng Chua has asked again about is nailless a defining feature of Malay houses? What's the reason for it? Is it lack of availability?
No, actually, what happens in ancient times, not just in Malay houses, in Chinese houses, in Europe, all the half-timbered houses, they use what's called a wooden dowel. There is you drill a hole, you cut a hole right through, and they use a wooden peg. So the peg is made of the same material, and then you just knock it in, okay, like a wedge and all that stuff. Now, what happens is that the water will be absorbed, moisture is absorbed into the wood. So the dowel expands and contracts with the wood. It's like, together. And therefore, there's no dislocation, or there's no separation from the nail. Whereas the modern nail is just thrust into it and it's bent and just clip it into position. It does not expand and contract with the wood. So all those, they always hear about old timber houses, not a single nail. What they use was just wooden nails. This is wooden dowels or pegs or wedges, like here, veggie, how they call it. So
Yeah.
it's just a different form of construction. Once you understand timber construction, there are certain rules in how you use the timber, how you get the best out of the timber. But it is highly sustainable, zero carbon footprint, I can tell you that.
Great, excellent. Siu Chua, again, another prolific questioner. Is Badan Warisan doing something to preserve Malay houses?
We are, I think Badan Warisan is definitely doing a lot for that, because we advocate it, we try and spread the gospel, so to speak, the message, that it is something worth keeping, your heritage structures. Don't just throw the baby out in the dirty bath water when you wash it. You have to keep what's worth keeping, and there's some beautiful ideas, a wonderful lifestyle. I mean, you go all the way to Bali, you go and see a Bali resort, Bali style. Hey, we got the same thing here, our own version of it. Why don't we celebrate it? Why don't we enjoy it?
Yeah.
Others can see it,
Yeah.
So Badan Warisan advocates it. We support you. Come, and if I can advise you, we advise you. But you have to, as a building owner, you must make the decision. In the case of our leaders, say somebody is one of the social elites, people with money, when they build a house, their dream is to build a Spanish hacienda, a big palazzo, they have no idea of building a beautiful timber house. I've seen some people, in Thailand, they build the most beautiful Thai house, because that's the ambition, that's the idea of reaching, that level of comfort. How many of us would do that? They must lead by example.
Yeah, if I may add, the whole idea of conservation, preservation in Malaysia or anywhere else is that multi-agencies are involved, and multi-agencies are required. There's no one agency that can hope to do it alone. So in this sense, Badan Warisan is doing all it can to advocate this whole notion of saving and preserving our built heritage. We have to work with the Jabatan Warisan in Malaysia, which is the government's body. We have to work with Ekuinas. We have to work with other agencies and highlight what needs to be preserved, what needs to be saved. Sometimes things happen so fast, we have to jump in quickly with our commentary and our advocacy. But the bottom line is that we're doing everything that we can. So it's a two-way process. People will have to tell us what are the buildings that need help and saving, and we form a registry. We write, we go visit, we see what can be done in that sense.
Can I just add something? Sure. You see, the Malay house form was created and developed, born into this fine situation before the days of electricity, before the days of all the modern conveniences like a water closet, a toilet. So now you have to incorporate these structures or these M&E things, mechanical and electrical installations into the house. So you need to wire it up. So you don't have to put it in conduits. You can put it in simple exposed wiring like that. But the biggest threat to these things are fire. Basically, it's a fire. So you have to make sure that your building is in compliance, and then it complies with the basic bylaws. Now, I don't see any real problem because there's a single-story structure. You can jump out the window, if there's a fire. So do not allow the authorities to insist on putting modern values too much of a good thing, where it becomes, they make a cripple of a building, so to speak, because they are just overly concerned. It's a single-story building, very easy to access out. Just put all the modern conveniences to make life more, adapt it to the present. We are not, it's a living museum, so to speak. You can live.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Surida, I think it's Surida from Singapore, our council member. She's got a very good question. Are our Malay houses similar to those in the ASEAN region, Indonesia, Cambodia, Laos, etc.?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. You see, like the Bugis came from Sulawesi, the Riau Linggi Empire in Singapore. So there's a very Bugis influence there. So like the ones in Negeri Sembilan, that was Johor, and then they came up to Selangor. The ones in Negeri Sembilan very Minang. So they came from the Minang from Palembang, all that from Sumatra. And then actually, so the Javanese tradition is slightly different, variations on a theme. So the Malay world It's just a collective generic term. But the whole Nusantara, there are many different cultures, many different variations on a theme. If you go to Thailand, you go to Cambodia, you go to the Philippines, there are variations on the same theme. They also have buildings on stilts. They also have these wooden structures, large overhangs, and so on. The motifs are slightly different, but the flavors, the scale, all that is slightly different. But they are of the same ilk, you know, of the same grouping. So, Sarita, I would say that yes, I mean, and the people who came to Malaya came from all these regions. So they brought to bear into Malay, our Malayan peninsula, all these different influences. And then, of course, the Chinese came along as well. So some of the things are incorporated into their design, all the fan lights above the doorways, you got Chinese motifs, you got butterfly motifs, they have all sorts of stuff. There's a lot of cross-fertilization, layering, multi-layering of ideas and things. If it works for you and is great, you adopt that culture. I mean, everybody loves their nasi lemak, you know. It doesn't matter what you are.
John Lau, a friend of ours, has asked about books. So please come to the Chen Munfi Library now in Badan Warisan. There are lots and lots of good books there.
Yeah.
Chan Kai Hong has asked about dimensions, but I think you've covered that, right?
Yeah. Okay, can I just go up to the Juliana Ahmad? You're asking about wood carving motifs. Yeah, there's some books on carving. There's a very famous carver from Kelantan side who passed on. There's a book on his work. But there are some books, but not necessarily on Negeri Sembilan alone. The motifs are quite similar. It's either a plant. If you're in Brunei, they always talk this air Malay, you know, there's like some floral plant or whatever. The motifs are basically from the environment. Yeah.
Okay, good. Lab Hey Chu has a question. Do we still have artisans, craftsmen to build such traditional Malay houses?
There are few and far between, and in fact, they are out of a job. You better go and help them. If you have a piece of land and you really love these old things, you can commission a new one, give them some work, you know, and have the best of both worlds. You can do a very modern version, like I showed you just now, that resort, you know. They're doing this as beautiful houses where you can spend, you know, a nice weekend away or whatever. You can build them. You can still find them. They're hard to get, but if you're determined, you can build them. I've seen people build beautiful resorts.
Yeah, so I mean, there are a lot of craftsmen still around, and it's just a question of keeping the traditions alive. So I think there are efforts being done to ensure that these traditions do not just die off after one generation. There's a question from Yon Shafni Samad. I'm sorry if I got your name wrong. He's doing a PhD in architecture, focusing on the traditional Sarawak Malay house. So he wants to know, have you come across any literature about Sarawak Malay houses or Sarawak Malay houses specifically?
The Sarawak Malay houses that I've known of are those you go to the cultural village. There's one just outside Kuching, beautiful. And they have all the different tribal Malanao house, you know, so you know, all sorts of Pinan houses, different types. Go and see it live. Yeah. I remember there were a few Malay houses there. So their version is slightly different. They have a bigger main hall area. They have like almost like a porch, very large size, slightly different, but there are some examples. In terms of literature, you have to dig around. I'm sure there have been studies made. You have to find out more for the Malay house. The books and compilations are done over the years with all the various universities. There are measured drawings done, but they tend to be very jealous with, they guard their knowledge jealously. You have to really pry and ask them for help to release the material. You pay for it. But all this research is going to the dogs, you know, literally, if we are not used, all this knowledge gained, if it's not transmitted and shared, you know, for other people. I mean, I've seen so many beautiful things that's why I'm giving this talk, you know, to share my knowledge and my experience of them, in the hope that somebody will take up the barrier and carry on with the tradition. Don't let this just die off like that beautiful Pura Sabtu, you know?
Yeah.
Just wasted away like a haunted house like that.
We need, I mean, we have to do everything we can to preserve not only the knowledge, but the drawings and the traditions and the methods, of how these buildings, beautiful buildings, have been
I
around.
think so sorry to interrupt. I think you have to understand that lifestyle was very different in those days. People were more polite. People were, I mean, like the walls never reached the ceiling, above the ceiling height. Even in a Chinese shop house, it stops above there. It's all perforated at the top. I mean, the floorboards had gaps in there. You could peep there, the peepholes, you can see who's at the front entrance. Therefore, people kept their privacy using different methods. They don't shout loudly, they're harsh whispers, they don't talk too loudly. And then you also consider your neighbors, you don't slam doors, for instance. That lifestyle has changed. People sat on the floor. When you sit on the floor, it's very leveling. The ceiling is 3 feet higher. The moment you elevate it to the dining table, somebody plonks a dining table into a Malay house, that becomes like a designation that's where you go and dine. They don't eat elsewhere. I have friends who are architects or people who appreciate these old houses. Once a weekend, they'll take a dulang and they get everybody to sit on the floor and they eat off the floor, but the Indians still do, and live their lifestyle. You don't need to take on all these foreign imports, Western way of life. Now it's unfortunately very much what's in the mainstream media, the American way of life, Hawaiian or whatever. It's a different approach to life. You have to decide what you want.
Good. We are about to end soon. So there's one question. I've left it to the last because it's not really, in a sense, related to what you've spoken today. But I'll still read it out because there is a link. There's a sort of connection between the traditional Malay house and the question. So it's from Sabaria Ahmad Khan. She wants to know about the contributions of the Chinese builders to the built forms during the 1900s. What are the elements and features that relates to the Chinese characters integrated or assimilated to the Malay context?
I think there's a cross-fertilization. If you go to a typical Malay shop house, a Chinese shop house in Malacca or the townhouses, you'll find there's what's called a pintu pagar. There's this swing door, like a cowboy sort of thing, beautifully carved. That's from a Malay influence. Even the balustrading with the cut wooden panels, there's a lot of cross-fertilization, ideas brought. These are craftsmen. They understand the same language of timber and ventilators and so on and so forth. So the Chinese would do butterfly windows. They have bat motifs and so on and so forth. The planning will be more formal. The Chinese one will be very symmetrical, and then it breaks down into asymmetry in the insides. The point is that you adapt it to suit the climate. When the Europeans came, they did the same thing. They took a colonial building and they adapted it to the local environment. They have verandas all around. They have large overhanging eaves. The ground floor is usually masonry, but the upper floor and the roof, they're all made of timber. So you adapt, and then it's a marriage of both worlds. The Chinese had a lot to contribute. They even built a lot of the mosques. People forget, in East Coast, a lot of the timber craftsmen were from China. And in the case of Kampung Cina in Terengganu, they have hundreds of years of connection with Chinese. There's a whole community living there. That's why it's called Kampung Cina.
Yeah, and the merging of these cultures has resulted in the Peranakan culture that
absolutely
in the straight settlements of the colonial period. Yeah. Okay, so we're sort of ending now. I urge everyone who's listening to this talk to check the chat part of the screen as well. There's some interesting and good information about books and other comments as well. So I'll end the Q&A session now, but I've got some closing remarks. Before we go, I would like to thank Iltizam by Ekuinas for their generous support for this webinar. For the past 2 years, Ekuinas has supported the repairs and refurbishment of Badan Warisan Malaysia's Rumah Penghulu Abu Seman. And we are very, very grateful for that. My thanks to the organizing team for today's talk, fellow council member Surida Jalaluddin, as well as Vanessa, Amira, and Rosmiza. Above all, I would like to thank everyone who attended today's webinar for your interest and participation and all your questions and comments. We truly appreciate your support. In case you've missed, a number of people have asked about this, in case you've missed any part of today's talk, a video will be made available on our YouTube channel. So please follow us on our social media as we will announce when the video will be available. Please follow Badan Warisan Malaysia on our website. You can subscribe to our e-newsletter, Jendela Warisan. Become a member if you can, or follow us on Facebook and Instagram for more information on upcoming events or news on heritage in Malaysia. On the 4th of December, I think there's going to be a fair, a Christmas fair where you can buy well-made goods and presents for Christmas or end of the year events. Now, finally, Badan Warisan Malaysia is an independent non-government organization, and we do not receive any financial support from the government. If you have enjoyed today's talk and wish to support our educational and advocacy work, please donate to Badan Warisan Malaysia. The details are available here on the screen. And also on our social media and website. So thank you very much in advance for your kind support. Thank you to Architect Bane, and thank you everyone. So have a great and lovely weekend. Thank you.